In 2007, Meredith Kercher was found murdered in her apartment in Italy. Amanda Knox and her boyfriend were accused, igniting an international media storm and years of legal battles. Today, we unravel the case that gripped the world and left many questions unanswered. If you're into deep dives on true crime, don't forget to like and subscribe for more in-depth content. On November 1st, 2007, the town of Perugia, Italy became the center of a tragic and shocking crime. Meredith Kercher, a 21-year-old British exchange student, was found brutally murdered in the apartment she shared with American student Amanda Knox and two Italian flatmates. Meredith had been studying in Italy for only a few months, attending the University of Perugia, and was looking forward to what should have been an exciting time abroad. The day her body was discovered began with concern. Meredith's friends hadn't heard from her and grew worried after she missed several appointments. Later that afternoon, her bedroom door was found locked, which was unusual, and efforts to contact her went unanswered. Fearing something was wrong, one of her friends alerted the police. The police arrived at the house and, unable to enter her locked room, forced the door open. Inside, they were met with a horrific scene. Meredith Kercher lay partially clothed on the floor, covered by a duvet. Bloodstains were found across the room, including on the walls and floor. She had suffered multiple stab wounds, with the fatal blow being a deep wound to her neck. These injuries, combined with the state in which her body was found, indicated that she had been sexually assaulted before her death. Key forensic evidence was immediately collected from the crime scene. Blood was found on Meredith's clothing and body, and there were clear signs of a struggle in the room. Her purse had been emptied and some of her belongings were missing, including her cell phones, which were later discovered in a nearby garden, adding to the mystery of the crime. The initial examination of the scene revealed conflicting evidence that would later become the focus of the investigation. The broken window in one of the apartment's rooms suggested a possible break-in, but investigators quickly raised doubts about this theory. The way the glass had fallen inside the room and the undisturbed state of the apartment made it seem like the break-in had been staged, casting suspicion on someone who had access to the apartment. A thorough forensic sweep of the apartment uncovered more clues. DNA evidence collected from the scene included traces of an unknown male on Meredith's body and inside her room. Investigators also found mixed DNA samples in various locations, such as the bathroom, where both Amanda Knox's and Meredith Kercher's DNA were found in bloodstains near the sink. As forensic experts combed through the evidence, they made a critical discovery. A kitchen knife from Raffaele Sollecito's apartment, Amanda Knox's boyfriend at the time, was found to have Amanda Knox's DNA on the handle and what was believed to be Meredith Kercher's DNA on the blade. This knife would later become a key piece of evidence in the trials. Further analysis of the crime scene revealed traces of Rudy Guede, a local man with a criminal history. Guede's DNA was found on Meredith's body and in her bedroom, specifically on her bra clasp, which had been broken during the assault. This discovery pointed to Guede's physical presence at the scene, though questions would remain about the exact sequence of events that led to Meredith's death. Despite the wealth of forensic evidence, the investigation was far from straightforward. The crime scene itself had been compromised during the early stages of the investigation, with multiple people, including the police and flatmates, moving through the apartment before forensic teams could secure it. This, along with questionable handling of some key pieces of evidence, would later fuel debates about the reliability of the findings and the fairness of the trials. Initially, Amanda Knox stated that she had spent the entire night of the murder with Raffaele at his apartment. She claimed they had cooked dinner, watched a movie, smoked marijuana, and went to bed. This was supported by Raffaele's statement at first, but as the questioning continued over several days, both of their alibis began to shift. During one of her police interrogations, which lasted several hours without legal representation and reportedly under significant pressure, Amanda suddenly introduced a new version of events. In this revised statement, Amanda claimed to have been at the apartment at the time of the murder and accused her then-boss, Patrick Lumumba, of being the person who killed Meredith. She stated that she had heard Meredith screaming from her bedroom and saw Lumumba in the house but felt too frightened to intervene. This accusation led to Lumumba's arrest, but there was no forensic evidence to connect him to the crime. He also had a solid alibi, supported by a customer who confirmed that he had been working at his bar that night. Lumumba was quickly released, and this false accusation further undermined Amanda's credibility. Amanda's behavior during the initial stages of the investigation also drew attention. Witnesses described her demeanor as oddly casual and at times inappropriate. For example, she was seen kissing and embracing Raffaele outside the apartment in the hours following Meredith's death, which was interpreted by some as a sign of indifference. Additionally, she was reported to have performed a cartwheel or split while waiting in the police station, an act that the media would later sensationalize. Knox herself would later explain that her actions were misinterpreted and stemmed from a state of shock and confusion rather than callousness. Raffaele's statements also became inconsistent. After initially corroborating Amanda's alibi, he later contradicted her, stating that she had left his apartment at some point during the evening and wasn't with him all night. This further complicated their defense and added to the growing suspicion around them. The police viewed these changing stories as an attempt to cover up their involvement in the crime. Meanwhile, forensic teams were analyzing evidence collected from the crime scene. The initial findings included an unknown male's DNA inside Meredith's room and on her body. It wasn't until a few weeks later that this DNA was matched to Rudy Guede, a local Ivorian man with a minor criminal record. Guede had a history of burglaries and had been seen around Perugia in the days leading up to the murder. After the match was confirmed, the police also found Guede's fingerprints on Meredith's belongings and in her bedroom. Guede's presence at the scene seemed to offer a more concrete lead, but by this point, the focus on Amanda and Raffaele had intensified. Despite Guede's known involvement, the prosecutors argued that the crime could not have been committed by him alone. Their theory suggested that the murder was a group attack involving Knox and Sollecito, possibly motivated by a sexual assault. They pointed to the state of Meredith's body, the signs of multiple assailants in the room, and the conflicting alibis as proof of a conspiracy among the three suspects. The media attention around Amanda Knox in particular only fueled the suspicions. Her portrayal in the Italian press as a manipulative and deceitful young woman dubbed Foxy Knoxy played into a narrative that she was the mastermind behind the crime. Raffaele, by contrast, was depicted as a less significant accomplice, someone who may have been drawn into the situation through his association with Knox. Despite the mounting evidence against Guede, who fled Italy shortly after the murder and was later extradited from Germany, the case against Knox and Sollecito continued to build. The police and prosecution maintained that the presence of mixed DNA samples in the bathroom, where traces of both Knox's and Kercher's blood were found, suggested that Knox had been involved in cleaning up after the murder. They also focused on a kitchen knife found at Raffaele's apartment, which had Knox's DNA on the handle and what was believed to be Meredith's DNA on the blade. This piece of evidence became a cornerstone of the prosecution's argument, though it would later be heavily contested due to concerns about contamination and the small amount of DNA present. As the investigation progressed, Knox and Sollecito were formally charged with murder, sexual assault, and staging a break-in. Despite Guede's definitive physical evidence linking him to the scene and his separate conviction in a fast-track trial, the prosecution continued to emphasize Amanda's and Raffaele's involvement, arguing that the nature of Meredith's injuries and the evidence of multiple attackers pointed to a coordinated attack. Rudy Guede, whose DNA was found on Meredith's body and in her room, was arrested shortly after fleeing to Germany, where he was apprehended and extradited back to Italy. Guede's case was handled in what is known as a fast-track trial, a legal option in the Italian justice system that allows defendants to receive a shortened trial process in exchange for potentially reduced sentences. In Guede's case, this expedited trial began in late 2008, and the evidence against him was strong. His DNA was found on Meredith's bra clasp, her body, and in her room, leaving little doubt that he had been at the crime scene. Guede maintained that he had been at the apartment but claimed he did not kill Meredith. He offered a version of events where he was in the bathroom when an unknown assailant broke in and attacked Meredith. Despite his claims, the court did not find his story credible. On October 28, 2008, Guede was convicted of murder and sexual assault and sentenced to 30 years in prison. His sentence was later reduced to 16 years on appeal, with the court finding that while he had played a central role in the crime, he had not acted alone. While Guede's trial progressed relatively quickly, the trials of Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito were far more drawn out and complex. In 2009, Knox and Sollecito were put on trial for the murder of Meredith Kercher. The prosecution's case against them relied heavily on forensic evidence, including DNA found at the crime scene and the theory that the crime had been a group effort involving all three individuals. The prosecution focused on a few key pieces of forensic evidence to build their case. One of the most significant items was a kitchen knife found in Sollecito's apartment. Investigators claimed that the knife matched the size and shape of the wounds on Meredith's body and, crucially, contained traces of Amanda Knox's DNA on the handle. Additionally, the prosecution argued that a small amount of Meredith's DNA was found on the blade. This knife became one of the central pieces of evidence in the case, though its significance would be hotly debated during the trial and subsequent appeals. Another key piece of evidence was Meredith's bra clasp, which had been torn during the attack. The clasp was found at the crime scene and was said to contain traces of Raffaele Sollecito's DNA. However, this evidence was not collected until several weeks after the murder, raising questions about the possibility of contamination. Despite these concerns, the prosecution used the bra clasp to tie Sollecito to the crime. The prosecution built a narrative suggesting that the murder had been the result of a violent and sexually motivated attack carried out by Knox, Sollecito, and Guede. They theorized that Knox had been the instigator, driven by personal conflicts with Meredith, and that Sollecito and Guede had assisted her in the crime. This theory was largely circumstantial, relying on the forensic evidence, the inconsistencies in Knox's and Sollecito's alibis, and the assumption that the nature of the attack required multiple perpetrators. The trial was marked by significant media attention, particularly focused on Amanda Knox. From the beginning, Knox was portrayed in a highly controversial light. Italian media gave her the nickname Foxy Knoxy, a moniker originally from her childhood soccer days, but which the press twisted into a label implying cunning and seductiveness. Stories about Knox's behavior during the investigation, such as her alleged cartwheel in the police station and her relaxed demeanor, were sensationalized, often casting her in a negative light. Her personal life, including her romantic relationships and sexual history, became frequent topics of media discussion, further fueling public interest in the case. This portrayal heavily influenced public perception, and many people around the world began to view her as a manipulative figure capable of murder. Raffaele Sollecito, by contrast, was less of a focal point for the media. His portrayal was more subdued, often characterized as a quiet accomplice under Knox's influence. Still, the prosecution maintained that he had played an active role in the crime, and the forensic evidence tying him to the bra clasp became central to the case against him. Throughout the trial, Knox and Sollecito maintained their innocence, insisting that they had spent the night of the murder together at Sollecito's apartment. However, the changing nature of their statements during the initial investigation, combined with the forensic evidence, led the prosecution to push forward with the theory of their guilt. In December 2009, after a lengthy trial, Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito were convicted of murder and sexual assault. Knox was sentenced to 26 years in prison, while Sollecito received a sentence of 25 years. The verdict was met with shock and outrage from those who believed the evidence against them was insufficient, while others felt that justice had been served. The media coverage only intensified after the verdict, with debates about the reliability of the forensic evidence, the influence of public opinion on the trial, and the role that the media had played in shaping perceptions of Knox and Sollecito. Their convictions set the stage for a series of appeals that would drag on for several more years, keeping the case in the spotlight and continuing to raise questions about the fairness of the proceedings. The appeal trial, which began in November 2010, focused primarily on the forensic evidence, especially the DNA samples that had played a crucial role in the prosecution's original case. Independent experts were brought in to re-examine the evidence, and their findings would prove to be pivotal. The court-appointed experts concluded that the DNA evidence, particularly the traces found on the kitchen knife and the bra clasp, was unreliable due to significant procedural flaws in the way it had been collected and analyzed. One of the central pieces of evidence in the original trial was the kitchen knife found in Raffaele Sollecito's apartment. The prosecution had claimed that the knife contained Amanda Knox's DNA on the handle and Meredith Kercher's DNA on the blade, suggesting it had been used in the murder. However, the independent experts found that the amount of DNA allegedly belonging to Meredith on the blade was so small that it could not be definitively analyzed. They also raised concerns about contamination, as the knife had been improperly handled during the investigation. There was no blood on the knife, and it was later argued that it did not match the wounds on Meredith's body, casting further doubt on its relevance to the crime. Similarly, the bra clasp that allegedly contained Raffaele Sollecito's DNA was found to have been compromised. The clasp had been left on the floor of Meredith's bedroom for 47 days before it was collected, raising serious questions about contamination. The court-appointed experts noted that the forensic protocols used in handling the clasp were inadequate, and the possibility of external DNA transfer could not be ruled out. As a result, the DNA evidence linking Sollecito to the crime scene was effectively discredited. In addition to the forensic issues, the defense teams also highlighted inconsistencies in the prosecution's narrative. The theory that the murder had been a coordinated attack involving Knox, Sollecito, and Rudy Guede was called into question, as no clear motive for such a crime had ever been established. The defense argued that Guede had acted alone, given that his DNA was the only conclusive evidence found on Meredith's body and in her room. Furthermore, there was no physical evidence placing either Knox or Sollecito directly in Meredith's bedroom at the time of the murder. As the appeal progressed, it became increasingly clear that the original conviction had been based on flawed evidence. The appellate court, recognizing the lack of solid forensic proof and the mishandling of key evidence, ultimately overturned the convictions of both Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito on October 3, 2011. When the verdict was announced, the courtroom erupted in a mix of emotions. Knox, who had been stoic throughout much of the trial, broke down in tears as the judge declared her acquittal. She and Sollecito were immediately released from prison. Knox's emotional response was mirrored by many supporters in the courtroom, while others, especially those connected to Meredith Kercher's family, were devastated by the decision. Following her release, Amanda Knox returned to the United States. Her journey home was met with intense media scrutiny, as her case had become a global sensation. Upon arriving in Seattle, she gave a brief statement to the gathered press, expressing her gratitude for the support she had received and her relief at being reunited with her family. Knox's return to the U.S. was deeply emotional. She had spent the prime years of her young adult life behind bars, and now, at 24 years old, she was trying to reclaim her freedom. In 2013, Italy's highest court, the Court of Cassation, made a surprising and significant ruling. It overturned the 2011 acquittal of Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito and ordered a retrial. This decision came as a shock to many who had believed the case was closed following their release. The retrial reignited international interest in the case and put Knox and Sollecito back into the legal spotlight. The reasoning behind reopening the case centered on what the Court of Cassation identified as procedural errors and gaps in the reasoning of the appellate court that had acquitted Knox and Sollecito. The prosecution argued that the acquittal had been based on an overly critical assessment of the forensic evidence and that the possibility of contamination, which had played a key role in overturning the convictions, had been overstated. They maintained that the DNA evidence, specifically the traces found on the kitchen knife and Meredith Kercher's bra clasp, should not have been dismissed so easily. Additionally, the prosecution argued that the acquittal failed to adequately explain several aspects of the case, including inconsistencies in Knox's and Sollecito's statements and the supposed staging of a break-in. The Court of Cassation ruled that the appellate court had not sufficiently examined all the evidence, and they ordered the case to be retried. This decision was based not only on the forensic questions but also on the view that Knox's false accusation of Patrick Lumumba, her boss at the time, had not been fully factored into the overall assessment of her credibility. The prosecution continued to maintain that the crime had been a coordinated attack involving Knox, Sollecito, and Rudy Guede, who had already been convicted and was serving his sentence. With the case now reopened, Knox and Sollecito once again faced the possibility of being found guilty. The retrial, ordered in 2013, reignited the case in the public eye and reignited the debate about the role of forensic evidence, the influence of media coverage, and the question of whether justice had been served for Meredith Kercher. In 2015, after years of legal battles, Italy's Supreme Court issued a final ruling in the case of Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito. The court definitively acquitted both of them of the murder of Meredith Kercher, bringing an end to a long and controversial judicial process that had spanned nearly 8 years. This ruling not only cleared Knox and Sollecito of the charges, but also marked a scathing critique of the handling of the investigation and prosecution. The Supreme Court's decision was based on what it described as stunning flaws in the investigation and a lack of credible evidence linking Knox and Sollecito to the crime. The court emphasized that the case against them had been built on weak forensic evidence, much of which had been discredited during the appeals process. The DNA evidence in particular, the traces found on the kitchen knife and Meredith's bra clasp, was determined to be unreliable, largely due to contamination concerns and improper collection methods. These were the same issues that had led to their earlier acquittal in 2011, but this time the Court of Cassation provided a final, unequivocal ruling. The court went further by stating that there was no clear motive and no plausible explanation for why Knox and Sollecito would have been involved in the murder alongside Rudy Guede, whose conviction had already been confirmed. The court also criticized the prosecution's theory, which suggested a coordinated attack, as speculative and unsupported by solid evidence. In its ruling, the court expressed regret for the years Knox and Sollecito had spent under the cloud of suspicion, acknowledging that they had been wrongfully implicated in a crime for which there was no reliable proof of their involvement. Knox also authored a memoir, Waiting to be Heard, in which she detailed her ordeal, the emotional and psychological toll of the trial, and her time in prison. She has appeared on numerous media outlets and platforms speaking about her experiences and the broader problem of wrongful convictions. In her public appearances, Knox has consistently emphasized the importance of accurate forensic practices and the dangers of media sensationalism in influencing public perception before all facts are known. In 2021, Rudy Guede was granted early release from prison after serving the majority of his reduced sentence. His release came as Knox and Sollecito had long been exonerated, and while both of them had been acquitted and cleared of the crime, Guede's conviction remained intact. The disparity in outcomes between Guede and the other two suspects highlighted the ongoing complexity and controversy surrounding the case. Guede's release marked the final chapter in his involvement in the legal proceedings, yet the case as a whole remains one of the most debated and closely followed criminal trials in modern history. Thanks for watching. If you found this deep dive into the case interesting, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more true crime content. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.